in terms of what's happening at Walter Sisulu University. You may recall last year a similar incident occurring at the university, leading to an inquiry by the South African Human Rights Commission on the alleged use of excessive force by law enforcement and security personnel. The commission, we understand, is in the process of finalizing the report from the 2024 incident. Let's talk to the Eastern Cape Human Rights Commission head, Dr Eileen Carter. Dr Carter, good morning to you and welcome to the program. So the events of yesterday seem to be quite complex and riven with some mixed messages around the status of the deceased, the events leading up to the shooting, and also how management is handling the tragedy. What are your concerns this morning?
Morning, Iman, and morning to the viewers. Although this is a new and developing story, it does echo a lot in terms of the facts of last year. It relates to grievances of students, it relates to students protesting, and it relates to the response to those students protesting. So from the Commission's side, we are reflecting very heavily on the report that is currently in its finalized stages, because the themes remain the same. We are looking into the Section 17 determination in the Bill of Rights, the right to peacefully protest. But we are also looking at the violent confrontation that in these cases seem to be systemic. So from the Commission's side, we are definitely concerned about what we do deem is now systemic concerns and issues relating to Walter Sisulu University. But then secondary, whether our students are informed enough about their duties and responsibilities when we speak about peaceful protest.
I want to bring in the context and the history around this, Eileen, because I think that they are germane to defining the atmosphere on campus and why things ultimately end up in such a violent way. A history of violence at this university over the last few years. In March 2016, Mthatha campus, a clash between private security guards, a student and a guard were both injured in that incident. March 2018, Ibika campus in Butterworth, there was a shooting that occurred during infighting between private security guards, and it also resulted in students being injured there, and as well as 3 guards being injured. 3 WSU campuses were closed over security concerns. We've also seen student murders on campus, giving rise to the moniker, the University of Death. And it's interesting then to get your assessment. I know that this report is pending, and maybe we can dig into a few of those issues a little bit more just now, because it's not, it hasn't been released. But there is an environment of a lack of safety at that institution. And from your vantage point, how does that, in general, compromise the concept of psychological safety at an institution of higher learning?
I think you point out something very important. It's an environment that is currently conducive to these types of violent responses and protest activities. So what we need to look at is how do we address it and what is the cause of all of this? Now, one of the causes that the students very pertinently pointed out to us, and which is reflected again in yesterday's activities, is the facilities of the university they do not deem to be appropriate. Now, whether that is reasonable or not, we need to go and assess as well. And that is what we've done in this investigation as well. Because we need to also then ask the students to come to the table and discuss very clearly what are their grievances, and then allow for these grievances to be ventilated through and addressed through proper processes and protocol. Now, that is why I want to go back and reflect on how do we equip our very young students who have an absolute right that can be limited in terms of Section 17 of the Constitution. They are allowed to raise their concerns. They are allowed to protest. But are they aware of the parameters of these legal protests, if we can call it like that? So what we need to unpack is, do we equip them enough? Do we capacitate them with information? And also, do we warn them of the risks of online inflammatory platforms, where what we saw last year is happening again this year, where students will go on these platforms and spread perhaps disinformation, which would then move their other students and the learners to join the protest. Sometimes they don't even know why. What we heard in the inquiry, and the inquiry is online also to cross-reference, is that some of the students last year did not even want to participate in these activities, but they were basically forced by the other students in the rest to say, no, 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 we are all standing on this together. So we need to capacitate these students. Number one, how do we air our grievances through proper protocols? Number two, what is our rights as well as duties in terms of Section 17? But also then we have to reflect on the force that is currently or may be used in escalation of these processes, and whether that is proportional.
But Eileen, whose job is it to capacitate students? As you say, constitutionally their right to protest is safeguarded, but there are parameters, there are guardrails within which they have to operate before things, get out of hand and lead to a situation where life and limb could be at risk. So whose job is it to do that? Because we're not also hearing enough about management being front and center as we'd expect them to be, taking leadership and showing leadership in situations like this, not only from yesterday, but historically.
So I do have to, again, point out that it looks like there is a little bit of a factual dispute currently on the ground. But legally, I think we are very clear that the use of force, the use of live ammunition, just to reflect on our report that is pending, we also sent the casings that we had in our possession to ballistic experts to analyze whether this was in fact live ammunition and whether the public order policing are in fact acting in accordance with the relevant standing orders. So for us, the responsibility is perhaps to see where is the gap? Where is the gap in these training and information sessions and capacitating? And perhaps, is it the university? Is it the student bodies? Is it SAPs? Is it perhaps, us as individuals? Where does that liability and that responsibility end? So that would be one of the aims of our report, to see whether we have a gap and whether there's a need to fill this gap. But currently, Iman, it's just, we are very clear in saying that there has to be a restraint on the ground. We need to prevent any escalation of this protest, and protest must remain peaceful.
You mentioned a little earlier on that the facilities don't seem to be up to the standard that they ought to be, and I just want to find out whether the SAHRC has done, a site visit. What did you find when you went there?
So the fact-finding mission always also include engaging directly with the students involved. Now, in the previous engagement, we have engaged with the SRC. We called upon the platform on students to come and give their version on the facilities back then related to the transportation and the transport of students by private vehicles as well, and taxi vehicles to the campus, and the costs involved. So again, now in this instance, and that's why I want to cross-reference again to the factual dispute here, in this instance, it reflects on perhaps parameters that have been put in place in the residences themselves. Now, it is something that we will have to look into again, but we are consistently engaging with the facilities management, the university management on these matters, because they have a right to respond. Previously, they gave us evidence of how many times they had responded to the SRC and the grievances lodged by these students. So in this instance as well, we have to do due diligence, and we have to give a right of reply before we can comment on the factual issues at hand.
Are you able to share, before we close, Eileen, just some of the other, again, if it's premature and you want to wait until that report is consolidated, but just some other trends that have emerged at WSU that are concerning and really need to be taken more seriously than they have historically?
So I do think it's a little premature. I'd like to wait for our report to be released formally. But what I can say is there are certainly areas that need fortification. We cannot every year, this time of the year, last year it was May, be at the precipice of what can be something that really escalates and pose a threat to the safety of students, management, and the public at large. So at this stage, there will definitely be gaps identified, but we will similarly, as per our mandating legislation, make the recommendations in order to make sure that we do not have this perpetual and systemic repeat of a potential peaceful protest turning into something that can be a violent confrontation.
And we saw that escalate quite quickly yesterday when our reporter was in the field, and you saw a drastic step being taken by students to conceal their identity. We heard from one of these student body representatives earlier on one of our earlier programs this morning that was to safeguard themselves from being singled out and scapegoated, just to paraphrase what he said. But if you're advising the student body, based on what you've seen before, the propensity for violence and fatalities in situations like this, what would you say to the student body, given that this is an emotive issue, it's an historic issue, a life has been lost here, and so emotions are running high?
So for us, it's very important that all parties that are aggrieved return to the negotiation table. They have to be airing their grievances in a manner that is conducive to resolution. Now, number two is not to contribute to escalation of these matters. Now, I've referred to WhatsApp, I've referred to disinformation being spread online. That is moving students to perhaps act in a manner based on false information. So we are calling upon all parties, this is inclusive of the security forces as well, to act with restraint, return to the table for negotiations in order for us to be able to air our grievances in a manner that does not contribute to further threats of lives.
All right, Eileen Carter, thank you for your time.